Exomniverse, I saw your video and your opposition seemed to be well thought out. Your points seem to be 1, that culture is what matters, and that race doesn't determine culture, and 2, that race doesn't matter. Now, before I address your points, the truth of the matter is that white nationalism is simply the expression of a biological urge. It's the desire for the group organism to preserve itself. Now, you can say that doesn't matter because culture is raceless, but you putting a premium on culture is, in the first place, necessarily arbitrary. You value culture? Okay, I value race. It's all opinion. Why is race important? I say it's important. Why is culture important? You say it's important. But moving on to your 2 points. First, that culture is what matters and that race determines culture. Well, you're absolutely correct in that race does not determine culture. The reason being that determine is way too strong a word. Let's compare Africans and Japanese and baseball. Here's a passage from an article in VDR that I'll put in the description. Okay. The relative restraint of East Asians contrasted with the noisiness of Africans is apparent to anyone visiting their home continents. When the New York Yankees played the first game of the 2004 baseball season before a packed stadium in Tokyo, the announcers noted how very much quieter the crowd was than at those games in the U.S. But it was a more tranquil disposition, not a lack of interest in the game, which hushed the crowds. Because of the time difference, people all over Japan regularly get up at 2 in the morning to view game broadcasts from the U.S. featuring American teams in which Japanese-born players are starring. Now, Russian would attribute East Asian restraint to 2 factors: higher IQs from larger brains and lower levels of certain hormones. So Japanese culture is a product of both the composition of its peoples and sociological forces from around the globe and within Japan. So you are correct, XO. Race does not determine culture. It merely influences it. The fact that the Japanese were hushed in the stadium is a product of the race. And the fact that they were playing baseball is a product of sociological forces. Your second point, that race doesn't matter. I think more fundamentally, race doesn't matter when controlling for relevant traits. I've linked my Race and IQ video series on this topic. The evidence for genetic differences between races in relevant traits, such as intelligence, is quite overwhelming, and that's a topic that is far too deep for this little video. Point being that yes, if a black man behaves like a white man, then race shouldn't matter. But he doesn't on average, and overwhelming evidence points to a high genetic causation. But let me take a more philosophical jab. Humans migrated, starting out of Africa, and on these migrations and through processes of settling down and genetic drift, they developed differences in many traits, one of which happens to be brain size. So the brain was affected by these things. So when you look at race, you need to understand that it is highly unlikely that the races of man all ended up being the same in relevant traits. Now, the fact that the different races have different brain sizes doesn't necessarily mean that bigger brains are better, but it does mean that the brain was affected. And the odds that intelligence was off limits is really I would say, a cosmic joke of a coincidence. Now, if you wish to get in a debate about race and intelligence, I'll be happy to oblige, but it's not really necessary. A bunch of white people want to go off and form their own land. And as long as it's a consensual arrangement, I see no logical argument against it. Now, you personally may think it's stupid, but that's no real reason to oppose those who want it. That's all. Take care.